This is our webinar today with two distinguished professionals from Yale's own Office of Career Strategy. I'm going to welcome you to our webinar, Interviews, Virtual is the New Reality. I'm Lisa Chapman, class of '81, founder and chair of 1stGenYale, and honored to host David Halek. David, can you wave? There's David, who's the Director of Employer Relations, and our own 1stGenYale, Derek Webster, class of '99. Derek, thanks for waving. Also a member of Pearson College. Derek is the Associate Director for the Arts at OCS, and he organizes and expands the University Arts Career Resources as part of the Common Good and Creative Careers Initiative. 1stGenYale is thrilled to support OCS in any way we can to connect 1st-gen students and alumni, as well as all university students and alumni, postdocs, you name it, and we're glad that you're here to join us today. As for me, I'm a volunteer for Yale, but my prior background, I'm a professional counselor now with students and young adults on career explorations. Prior, I was an investment banker and mergers and acquisitions and early with commercial banking at Citibank. I've also worked in a number of nonprofits. Derek and David are in Connecticut and I'm in New Jersey. And all of you, there are 54 of you and more joining, who are Yale students, young alumni, graduate school of the arts and sciences, postdocs, and GNP students as well. You're from 14 different states. 4 of you are from Canada. We have 52% of you are current Yale College students, 30% are current GNP students, and 43% are young alumni of the last 10 years. You guys represent aspiring entrepreneurs, educators, bankers, doctors, consultants, physicians, researchers, technicians, and so many more. And you're going to have incredible opportunities in the corporate, public, and nonprofit sectors. This webinar today is to help you in this new landscape of what do we do being in a virtual world, and everything's online. For today, I'm going to go over briefly our program. After my introductions, I'm going to turn it over to David Halek, who's going to go through all his research and work on how to interview successfully in the virtual reality. We'll follow by that with some question and answers period, and we'll wrap it up. As you can see, all of you are muted while we're speaking. I will unmute you when we get to the Q&A part as well. And this formal presentation is being recorded today. There's a chat feature on the bottom for all of you new to Zoom. It's toward the bottom of the screen on the right side. Feel free to ask us a question, or if you want to make a comment or you want to give additional information, feel free to use the chat feature. And when we get to the Q&A function, if you find yourself you'd like to send a question via chat versus raise your hand, that's totally fine. Just want to share that with you. And you're all in listening mode. I'm going to unmute you right now so you can see if there are any questions of anybody. You're all unmuted. Is there any questions from anybody in the audience right now? You're all unmuted. Some of you may have your microphones muted directly. So, okay, hearing no questions. All right, I'm gonna put you back on mute. Hold on, let me just do this. Mute. Hold on 1 second, mute all. Okay. There we go. Let me give a little bit of introduction, and I'm going to highlight David. I'm going to go back to speaker view. Where's David? Let's see if I can highlight David. Make host. I'm not sure I can highlight David. David, I think I can highlight you. Full screen. Okay. There's David. I'm going to hide myself. Let's see if I can hide myself. Sorry, this is taking a little bit of time. I'm not a total professional in this. Okay, I'm gonna hide myself. Okay, where's David? David, I don't know where David is. Speaker view. Well, I don't know. I'm going to have to come back to David. David is in the top of our screen. David is the Director of Employee Relations. He spends his time building relationships with leading corporations and other companies that want to expand their workforce with the talents of Yale graduates. He consults with organizations on campus recruiting strategies, facilitates employer engagement opportunities both on and off campus. Prior leadership roles were in strategic marketing, corporate relations, business development, institutional advancement in both the private sector and higher education. David has a BA from the University of Rochester. Let's see. Hold on, someone was sending me a message. University of Rochester, and a master's in education and an ED&S degrees in higher education administration from the University of Florida. He also has a professional certification in digital media marketing from NYU. That's David. And Derek, where's Derek? Derek, can you show your picture again?
Yeah, Lisa, I think there might be some people still waiting in the waiting room.
Yeah, let me go. I will go through them. Unfortunately, we have some unofficial invited guests, which I have found. So I'm going to be very careful. I've already invited, we already have 40 people in, and I will go do the rest, but I don't want to have any trolls in, and I don't want any Zoom bombing. So I'm being very cautious. But
absolutely, I think Janine might be one of them. So you might.
Oh, no, Janine's in.
No, she's still waiting.
Oh, she's still waiting. Well, let me get Janine in, definitely. I thought I admitted Janine. I'm sorry, Janine.
Did that work?
Janine, are you in? She should be in.
Yeah, I think she's in now.
Okay, I'm sorry about that, Janine. I apologize. As I was saying earlier, unfortunately, we have some people who are uninvited guests because I have a master list of who's been invited and who's RSVP'd, so I have to be careful. I don't want any trolls on this call, and I will go back to screening the others. So Derek, let me just highlight your background. You're Associate Director for the Arts. You were 1stGen at Yale, which is great. You work with students and alumni to explore creative careers. You work on recruited and external job searches. You improve networking approaches, and you navigate the arts, entertainment, and communications related industries. You graduated as a film studies major before spending a decade in Los Angeles, my also hometown. I'm so excited. As a literary manager and a script consultant, and you're currently also a student in the Fairfield Creative Writing MFA program. Now I'm going to turn it over to David, who's going to lead the presentation, and I'm going to put him on speaker view, so we'll just see David. So David, you should be on, and I'll go back to admitting people from the waiting room.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Lisa, for the introduction. And I'm sharing my screen, so hopefully everybody can see the presentation as I move forward. Again, hello and welcome to everyone. I'm glad to be with you this afternoon. I think we can all agree that this is a strange time we're in, both from a personal and educational or career standpoint. We're here with you this afternoon during this time of uncertainty to provide some support and to give you some guidance if you're wondering how to move forward toward your goal as you complete your degree programs and move forward in your careers. So we hope that you'll get some valuable takeaways from this afternoon's discussion. I'm going to move forward on the agenda. No, I can't forward the slides. Okay, as you can see from the agenda, I've grouped the agenda in a couple of themes. One is mindset, or an understanding of how we got to the reality we're at right now, and how you could move forward in your career and education plans by accepting the current reality. And the bottom line is preparation is everything. Second theme is skill set. We'll talk about interviewing basics, which are still key, whether you're doing it face-to-face or virtual, and some specific tips for how you can master the domain when it comes to virtual interviews. And finally, we'll mention to you some of the resources that are available through Yale and the Yale Office of Career Strategy as you prepare your own action plans and move forward with your actions towards your goals. Finally, we'll have some time for question and answers at the end. So I want to mention something about just talk something about how we got where we are right now. The new reality didn't happen overnight, as most of you probably know. Before the onset of the recent COVID-19 situation, we were seeing some shifts in the marketplace, in practices, in recruiting that many employers have taken advantage of. They've taken advantage of these practices both from a cost-saving standpoint as well as an efficiency standpoint. And now, in response to the COVID-19 situation, there's a little bit more pressure to move more quickly or adapt these new technologies to enable remote recruiting, interviewing, and onboarding. Companies over the last several years have begun to use some of these remote tools. If you're familiar with some of them, Pymetrics is a screening tool that companies use. It's a virtual screening tool that they use to screen candidates for fit with their position and in their organization. HireVue is a asynchronous virtual interview platform, and unlike live interaction as we're having right now, HireVue poses questions in a virtual format, and the respondent records their responses for saving and viewing later by the employer. We have seen that some of our employer partners, including L'Oreal, Goldman Sachs, Unilever, and others, have adopted these tools, and they claim to have experienced reduction in recruiting costs, reduction in time to hire, reduction in overall, or increase in efficiency in the overall hiring process. Some of them have also moved, as you can see in the some of the graphics, have moved to virtual career fairs and other types of campus events, whether information sessions or other interaction and engagement with students. There's been a lot of innovation in the past couple of years, but it's especially apparent in the last couple of months. Companies like Zoom and others have experienced a real boom in the demand for the services given the current circumstances. And so we want to talk a little bit about what this means for you, how you can navigate the current situation, how you can prepare for virtual interviews. Looking down the line, some of these practices that are being forced to adopt by employers, they actually may find that they are valuable tools to use and want to continue using them. So you might be thinking about how that might affect you, not only beyond the interview process, but down the line when you actually land on an opportunity. Perhaps an employer will ask you to consider, would you accept an opportunity on a remote basis or on a freelance or gig basis? Some of these things may come to be more common given the current situation. One of the things I want to stress when it comes to virtual interviews is the basics still matter. And whether you're doing it face-to-face or virtually, there are some specific things that you can prepare for that will enable you to be successful in your all-important interview. First and foremost is you should research the company and be familiar with any company that you're considering as a prospective employer or to which you've been invited in interview to interview for a position at the company. Know what's going on with the company, know maybe how they're responding to the current situation, be a little empathetic about what kind of challenges they may be facing, and perhaps you'll have a solution to some of the business challenges that may be facing and can offer a fresh approach. You're also wise to do a little background checking on your interviewer. Perhaps by looking at their LinkedIn profile, you can identify some common ground to bring up or make reference to in the context of the interview. Most importantly, I think thirdly, and these are things you have control over, is that you can make yourself a list of the likely questions that an employer will ask you. And this may be stating the obvious, but there's a core list of questions that most employers ask. And based on your own discipline, you can expect that they will ask given your particular skill set or the requirements of the position. So you're well advised to make a list of these most likely questions and rehearse your answers to these questions. And I can tell you this will go a long way in making you feel prepared when the time comes for your actual interview. I want to say that you should also spend some time practicing a career narrative. And on the OCS website, there are some tools and resources to help you with this. But basically, it's a very brief elevator type pitch that you can prepare to share when an interviewer asks you, so tell me about yourself, tell me about how you got where you are, and tell me where you're going. These are things that you will certainly have thought of in advance, but if you can practice them aloud with a friend or a classmate, you'll be much better prepared for the reality of delivering this information online. And finally, again, on the basics of preparing for an interview, have a list of key accomplishments that you're able to share when an interviewer asks you, so what are you most proud of in your academic pursuits, or in your internships, or in your career pursuits? And not only be able to articulate what those accomplishments are, but be able to provide proof, and not just your own opinion, but third-party proof, whether it's an award or recognition, an endorsement by a peer or manager, that you did accomplish what you were set out to do and what was expected of you. Now, the virtual interview adds some additional dimensions beyond what is you're accustomed to in a face-to-face experience. But again, the basics will provide the foundation for your ultimate success in a virtual setting. In the virtual setting, things to keep in mind are, since you won't be shaking hands with the interviewer, you do want to be able to find some way to make a connection using the technology and using eye contact and using your voice to establish some rapport and credibility with the interviewer. So keep in mind that your two main tools are your voice and the eye contact that you maintain throughout the interview experience. And I'll mention a little bit later in the tips, but one thing I want to emphasize is that when you're speaking to the interviewer, be sure that you're looking into your camera. Looking at the screen does not provide an experience of eye contact on the other end to the interviewer. It's okay to look at the screen when the other person's talking, but try to look directly into your webcam when you're speaking, and that is what will be perceived as eye contact by the person on the other end. Again, be conscious of your facial expression. You'll be positioned in the camera with just a head and shoulder shot, so there isn't a lot of body language to be revealed, but your facial expression and your eye contact can go a long way to conveying your enthusiasm for the job, your appreciation for the opportunity to interview, your interest in the company, and so forth. Also, because there are fewer cues from the interviewer when you're on camera in a virtual experience, try to keep your answers brief. Get accustomed to trying to provide answers that are no more than 30 seconds long. Brevity is key, and don't be afraid of not giving enough information, because if the interviewer wants more, they will prompt you to provide additional information or to expand on your answer. And then finally, one of the most important tips in the virtual interview situation is that you master the technology. It goes a long way in saying that that employers today are looking for tech-savvy new hires, and they expect you to be familiar with the tools. So it would be in your best interest to get as much practice as you can in advance on the many common tools like Zoom and others that may be used by the employer in the interview. The more comfortable with you are where you'll find various functions in the technology, and again, to practice eye contact and voice using the technology, the better prepared you'll be to be successful and be confident when the time of the interview comes around. I want to offer you my most important virtual tips for interviews using the technology that will help you land the job. Number one, and I will say that employers are not always forthcoming when they invite you to an interview to provide you all the information that you may need to have to be prepared, such as who exactly will you be talking to in the interview. I personally once had an interview that was remote, and I was invited by the person who I had been speaking with, but I was a little surprised by the fact that during the course of the interview, other people joined in, and the main interviewer maintained the contact, but he brought in other individuals during the course of an hour interview, which in the end worked out okay, but had I known in advance, I might have had a little bit more background about who those individuals were and what some of their concerns might have been. So ask who is going to be in the interview, what the time frame of the interview will be, how long it will last, and you'll probably find out when you're invited what platform will be used. But if it's not clear whether they'll be using Zoom or another tool, do find out what tool will be used so that you can get familiar with that tool on your own. You will find plenty of YouTube videos, tutorials on the various technology platforms that are commonly used for virtual interviews. You're well advised to gain some experience and exposure to how to use those tools. Testing your own technology is also important. Make sure you have a good working webcam and microphone. Do some testing with a friend, and if you find that the built-in webcam and microphone that are built into most laptop computers isn't sufficient, meaning that the picture's not clear enough, it's a little fuzzy, you may want to consider investing in a standalone webcam like I'm using today. They're not terribly expensive, but they do have a clearer picture and better sound. So test out your technology and including your internet connection. Make sure it's sufficient speed, that you'll get the kind of connection that won't be interrupted when you're participating in your interview. Thirdly, find a distraction-free background that is free of noise and other distraction, and hopefully has a background that's neutral, so it won't be distracting to the interviewer. In my case today, I've taken advantage of what's called a virtual background. Depending on the tool that you use or the one you're accustomed to, sometimes these are available, but otherwise I would say if you're in front of a white or gray wall or just a plain background that has the least amount of clutter that will be in camera view, the better off you'll be. Number 4 is to be focused and prepared. As I reviewed in all the basics of preparing for any type of interview, by the time you enter the virtual interview room with the interviewer, you want to know, what your key sound bites are going to be, that you're ready to respond to questions about your accomplishments and provide proof points for those accomplishments, and have done a little background on the company. So when they ask, why do you want to join the company and what interests you in the company, you're prepared to answer those questions. These are things that you're well equipped to find out in advance through many of the tools that are available through Yale or just through Google searches. I mentioned before, brevity is best. Keep your answers short and to the point. Again, the interviewer will prompt you if more information is desired or needed. Dress the part. You should dress the same way you would for a face-to-face interview. You want to give the best impression that you can in the virtual interview. And I think professional awareness would dictate that you would wear a business attire to an interview. And what's recommended is neutral dark colors, and no distracting jewelry or other accessories. And then finally, tip number 7 is to be sure you do follow up in a timely manner, just as you would for a face-to-face interview. Follow up within 24 hours with your interviewer or interviewers, thanking them for the opportunity, reinforcing the highlights of what makes you a strong candidate, and thanking them for the opportunity and express further interest in the position. Those are the key tips. And again, many of them apply to face-to-face, and some of them apply to the virtual situation. You're very fortunate in that there are many, many resources available to you through Yale to put your best foot forward, whether it's preparing for the type of career position you want to pursue or the career advancement opportunity you want to take advantage of. On the OCS website, and the URL is at the bottom of the screen, there are many, many resources that are available to all of you, whether you're in Yale College, the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, or many of the other graduate and professional schools that are participating today. We have a series of animated videos on a variety of topics, from resume preparation to networking to how to prepare for an interview. There's guidance on how to prepare your LinkedIn profile. And you can bet that most employers today, when they are considering you seriously as a candidate for a position, will be searching for a LinkedIn background or other social presence to basically confirm that the evidence that you provided in a resume is consistent with what they find in your LinkedIn profile. There are tools and resources for career decision-making on the website. There's some help and guidance on how to prepare a career narrative that I mentioned earlier in this session, and also career preparation techniques for interviews, informational interviews, or job interviews. And for the students that are in Yale College, the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, and the postdocs, there's some additional tools available to you through Yale Career Link and the website. And one of those I will highlight since it's new and some may not be familiar. We have a new tool called Big Interview, and it's exactly that. It's a virtual practice interview session where you can experience being posed a question by an interviewer on screen, on video, and then you can record a response, play it back, critique yourself, or share it with a peer for a critique. And this is probably one of the most valuable tools that you'll have to prepare for this type of interview. I think in summing up, I think to move toward your goals, preparing an action plan is the best thing that you can do in service of achieving your goals. Prepare your career statement and narrative, build your online presence, practice your interview questions, and whether it's face-to-face or preferably in a virtual environment, practice with a partner, a classmate or friend, trade places, and give each other feedback. I can't underscore enough the importance of doing this so that by the time you get to a real interview situation, you will have actually verbalized the answers you have in your head to what you think will be the most likely questions. They sound a lot different when you have to verbalize them to somebody else. So get that out of the way, get the few test runs out of the way, and you'll be much better positioned to present yourself well when the time comes for an actual interview. Test and retest your technology so that you're familiar with it, you're comfortable with how you look on camera, that you have a strong internet connection. I would say in general, stay in touch with prospective employers. I know many of you have offers pending, internships pending, offers that have been issued a while back. I think you're well advised to take the initiative to stay in communication with the employer. express a little understanding that you know that they may have other, many other issues that they're dealing with given the current situation, but you're still interested and willing to support their endeavors in any way you can. And finally, your action plan is to make sure that you review and take advantage of all the resources that are available to you through Yale and through the Office of Career Strategy. I think I invite my colleague Derek Webster to join me in opening the floor to any questions that you may have, Lisa as well. I hope you found some value in these tips and would be welcome to answer any questions that you have. Great,
so let's turn it over to Derek, and then we have another special guest who I'm going to introduce following Derek.
Fantastic.
So Derek, you should be in speaker view. Okay, good, great.
Thank you, yeah, and thank you, Dave, that was fantastic. So I'm gonna run through a couple of just kind of extra point tips on here. Could you unshare your screen for a second? And just in supplement and sort of like building on what Dave had already provided for us. So, a couple of things to keep in mind on the practical level. Dave mentioned testing the equipment. That's a really important detail. Make sure that you're doing that within platform. What sometimes gets overlooked when you actually get onto these platforms is looking into the specificity of your mic and your camera, right? I've seen a lot of people jump onto the Zoom and they've been on there before and they know how to, hit the link and get there, but they haven't actually gone through the detail of making sure the camera's operating appropriately. Sometimes there's multiple microphones, making sure you go through and go to that extra detail that isn't going to, come up at the wrong time in the midst of an interview. We talked about having a connection and that being important. The bandwidth, is sort of, it's the killer. I have kids downstairs who are doing their daily, academics. My wife is doing her own remote appointments. Half the time, like I will jump into a Zoom account and all of a sudden, like 6 of us are going all at once. To try to avoid that, make sure that you're prioritizing, you're communicating with whoever else is in your household at this moment. Right now, we're all kind of locked in the same 8 locations. So telling the parents, telling the grandparents, telling the friends and family, hey, I've got an interview. Let's make sure that I'm the one who's getting all the bandwidth right now. And that includes things like, and sometimes it's overlooked, make sure that you take cell phone devices and that do not require Wi-Fi, and take them off Wi-Fi when you're on a device that is going to be, soaking up a lot of that Wi-Fi. You do want the strength of the connection. You want to make sure that you're prioritizing that. In the same sense, you're going to want to make sure that you've eradicated all noise as far as you can. Some of that's about locational decisions. We talked about controlling your environment with neutral backgrounds and those sorts of things. I'm not doing a great job of it right now. As you can see, I sort of have a little bit too much detail going on back here with exposed wood and that sort of thing. But, even whatever you do have, sometimes you don't have a blank wall. Sometimes you don't necessarily have a room. It's just the corner of a room. Designing your space as best you can, taking down the distracting elements, putting up things that are telling parts of your story, having, the books in the background. Or there's a lot of optionality here, but just thinking through the process and not just setting up the camera and letting whatever's behind you dictate. It's about taking a little bit more control in that. And then, for noise, not locating yourself next to windows that might be facing the street, making sure there are doors closed, windows closed, curtains over windows when required in order to dampen any of those sounds. Again, as much control as you can take over these things. Lighting is another key that gets overlooked a lot. I'm going to show you a couple of things and just mention it to keep it in mind. So natural lighting is not usually enough for an interview. Like if you're just doing a Zoom, engagement, it's one thing. But if you actually want to make sure the shadows are being taken off the face, and there's a lot more, as Dave mentioned, all you really have is face and hand gestures. So you want to make sure those are coming across as clearly as possible. So as an example, like in my natural lighting setting, if I didn't bring another lamp over in order to expose and take some of that shadow away, it would look fine, but it wouldn't necessarily look professional. It wouldn't look like we were actually trying to make this concerted effort. Another thing to think about, and particularly if you have glasses like myself, you can use external lighting, but if you don't If you don't dampen it somewhat, if you don't use something to soften it, you will get reflection in the lenses, which would create their own distractions. So, the idea would be to use something with a shade, a softener. That way, like, the reflections are at a minimum. You still have a little bit, and it just comes across naturally, right? It doesn't look like you've really staged anything, but it turns it into an engagement that, like, has a little bit more of an organic sort of a feel to it. Like, you look like someone just walked into the room and you're talking with them, right? So lighting's important. Avoid backlighting as best you can. Again, I'm not exemplifying that very well right now because I have a couple of windows back here, and at certain times of day, it becomes a real problem. But as much as you have control over your space or can choose the venue that you'll be using, make sure that the backlighting is not problematic. And if you have to have it, compensate with additional lighting. Speak up, enunciate. I have a problem with this often enough, but you have to think through, just like in any interview, but even more so when you're on tape, right? Like when you're being recorded, there's digital transfer, there's microphone limitations. Make sure you're speaking clearly, you up volume, and make sure that you're actually pausing between clear thoughts and giving the microphone a chance to capture your audio. And that's something you wouldn't necessarily have to think of in a room, but like when you're talking about the virtual environment, it's an important detail. I'm using a lot of movements and gestures. You want to minimize those. They're actually good, right? Like if you keep them in frame, if you're kind of like extending your thoughts, you don't want to go out of frame. You don't want to make it obvious that you're actually in a box right here. You also don't want to be thinking, in terms of quick gestures that are going to potentially cause like a buffering issue or a delivery issue or cause more bandwidth. So slower gestures, controlled gestures, making sure you're owning the space. In that same way, making sure that you're centering self as best you can. You don't want to be too far back. You don't want to make the room the thing that you're really talking about. You want you to be you and presented clearly. But one of the advantages, in some ways we're talking about strictures and disadvantages to the virtual component of this. One great advantage, which is often overlooked when it comes to an interview or any engagement that requires you to have a detail and a lot of information. What you have here is a wall behind you, right? Breaking the third wall. Like you have the potential now to actually have post-it notes or taped documents, reference points. Now, I say that with a caveat because you don't want to use that as a crutch where you're constantly looking up and trying to find like, oh, what was that reference I wanted to say, or what was that answer to that behavioral question? But it does give you a little bit of an anchor point where if you draw a blank or if you can't remember something, you can have your bullet list over to the side, and all it takes is a glance over there and you're back caught up. That's something you can't do in a normal interview. So it's a gain that you're being given like in this kind of an environment. So make sure you take advantage of it within measure and don't allow it to sort of like run ahead of you and become something that could be a problem in of itself. Dave mentioned keeping the eye on the lens as best as possible when you're speaking. That's really important. And, there is a certain tension here, right? Because you do want to see the reaction of the other person. You don't want to just be talking into the lens. So if the platform provides the opportunity, make sure you've moved their image as close to that as possible. So you can be looking in the lens, but even with the slightest downtick or just with the peripheral, being able to keep track of, hey, are they catching what I'm throwing? Are they really picking up on this thing? So those are important details as well. We talked about dressing up, and part of this too is I would usually recommend dressing up entirely. So that's what you would normally wear to an interview, down to even wearing the slacks, the dress, whatever you would normally go in an interview with. There's two reasons for this. One is you never know when you might actually happen to stand up and forget that you're wearing your boxers and there goes the interview, or the potential that actually just getting the armor on, right? Just taking like the seriousness of putting on the tie, the dress, and making sure that you put yourself into that sort of energetic stature of being ready for this kind of conversation. It actually can help a lot, and particularly in an environment that is sometimes missing some of that formality. So I think those are most of the ones that I wanted to talk about. Oh, one other thing to keep in mind: if you do, when you're starting the interview, you want to ask, and if it has not been delivered before, if there is a technical issue, is there a contact number? Is there a phone I can call to follow up? Because if you get thrown off, you don't want to be spinning out there without any recourse. they would usually be quite fine to say, oh, great, here's a phone number. We can contact you. We can follow up afterwards on a phone call, or just let us know how it's happening, or reschedule. You just don't want to be like cast into the ether because, you know, the bandwidth issues kicked you out. Okay, so that's a little bit of fleshing out to some of the things we were talking about, but now let's go ahead and open it up to broader questions.
Great. Okay, I'm going to open up to gallery view. And first, before we get to the Q&A, I want to thank David and Derek for your wonderful presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce Janine Dames. Janine, do you want to come out? There you are. There's Janine. I'm so thrilled that you're on. Janine is the Associate Dean of Yale College and the Director of the Office of Career Strategy. She has a BS degree from Cornell and a JD from Fordham. She's been running OCS incredibly well since 2011. Is that right, Jane? 2011. She has extensive career services background and expertise, as well as prior legal professional work. She has her JD from Fordham, and she had many years in the legal profession prior to focusing on career services. So I want to introduce Janine and turn it over for Janine to you for a few words. And thanks again for being on our call. Let me unmute you. Wait a minute, I think I muted you by mistake. Let me unmute you.
I think you got it.
I think I got it. Okay, good.
Excellent.
Okay.
Well, thank you everyone for.
I'm going to put on speaker view, so you're gonna be visible. Okay.
Okay. So thank you everyone for joining us, and I'll just take a moment since Derek and Dave were talking about backgrounds. I'll say just a moment about my background. So I have my physical background, not my personal background. I have a teenage son who is a baseball player. So my enormous picture of Yankee Stadium is on one wall. But I also have been talking to the press lately, and if I turn this way, there is my professional background. So you can make one little corner of your room. I'm going to turn back around, so forgive me for making you dizzy. But you can make one little part of your room professional and keep the rest very much personal as you are. And so I use the baseball stadium when I talk with students and friends like you all. But I do want to reiterate everything Dave and Derek said today, and I know that you have great support throughout the university and with Lisa's group and so many groups here. I want to remind all of you that the Office of Career Strategy, as Derek and Dave mentioned, has tremendous resources online, free, public for everyone. Our main populations are students in Yale College, the Graduate School of Arts and Science, and the postdoc scholars and alumni groups of all of those. And just to show you how we are still fully up and running, and we're here for you. Since March 16th, when the campus went remote, we have held 473 virtual appointments. So we have many appointments open. We are here to talk with you. And there's many resources available for undergraduates who are eligible for the Domestic Summer Award. You may have gotten an email this morning from Dean Shun about how that has been expanded. If you have questions about that, please let us know. Basically, the expansion is that for students who have not used their Domestic Summer Award yet, you will be able to use it for 2020 only for either a traditional Domestic Summer Award experience, an international experience that's been converted remotely, or for courses in Yale summer session. So that is a really exciting expansion to allow students to continue their academic goals as well as their professional goals. There are many students out there that were concerned about language requirements in particular, so this is a really wonderful option to look into. So reach out to us, we're here for you, and we're so glad we're all in this together, and we will get through it. Thank you, Lise.
Great, Janine, thank you so much. And let me, okay, now we're gonna open it up to our audience. I'm gonna go to gallery view. I'm gonna unmute everybody. So let me go and unmute everybody, and let's see where we are. So, and you're feel free to ask a question by raising your hand or by sending in a chat message. So why doesn't it, hold on, there I am. This is the.
So I see a question on does the DSA extension apply to graduating seniors? Unfortunately not. The limitation of the DSA does continue to be through the junior summer.
Okay, also you're all unmuted by my but you need to unmute your microphone when you speak. If you have a question from someone in the audience, why not place the laptop further away so that the only one who's not interviewing is the only talking head? It would enable an interviewee to use your hand gestures, maybe be easier to look at the camera, and so forth. So I think the question is, why not put the laptop further away? So the only talking head.
Yeah, so I think there's the potential for that. Part of it is sort of the energy that you're trying to represent in the interview. If it's going to be, if there's components that are going to require you to use more of your body, my suggestion was actually more just on the face value of what you're really given an opportunity is you can carry emotively through facial features and small gestures. The farther you are away from the camera, the less control you have over that. And in a sense, like even on a big screen, they're not actually going to be able to carry as much of the emotiveness through those features. There's a give and take there, and a bit of it's about the comfortability of what you do want to be able to provide. If it's the sort of thing where you're going to be picking something up and showing it to them, you can't do that necessarily when you're presenting yourself this way. But I would say there's not. I wouldn't suggest that it's one or the other. But I would say, like, if it's mostly going to be a direct sort of face-to-face version of an interview, you want to be close enough that you can actually use the advantages of that.
Thank you, Derek. Anissa, I see we're highlighted. Do you have a question? I guess not. Pauline, you're highlighted. Are you ready for a question? No, I guess people are fluting back and forth.
Kenny has a question online on the chat that I'd like to answer, if I may.
Sure.
He asks, do you recommend building a profile online beyond LinkedIn? And that's a really good question. I would say that it may depend on your particular discipline. If you're in the arts, for example, you may have a portfolio online and a special place for that. If you're a performing artist, perhaps you have a performance on YouTube or elsewhere. But I will say that LinkedIn, for most people, should be your core tool. And most people do not take advantage of all the rich media capabilities of LinkedIn. And by that, I mean, you can connect in SlideShare presentation. You can attach articles or profiles that have been written from you, screenshots from maybe a press coverage that you've gotten, or an accolade from a client or a professor. Just take the time to look into LinkedIn, because there's lots of potential for long and short form writing. And the more that you actively contribute to those rich media channels, the more traction you'll get as far as people following you and taking an interest in you as a prospective candidate.
David, another question. Can you talk a little bit about the online job sources, the Indeeds, Monster.com, and the others? How safe are they? How secure are they? Students have asked. I've heard that it's not smart to send your resume to those online sites. Can you talk a little bit about all those outside resources?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Yeah, all the various job boards you mentioned, I think, are really good tools, and you should widen your horizons as far as where you look for job opportunities. As far as the safety and security of using those, I guess I would advise against just posting your resume and your contact information. And wait till you have verified mutual interest with a prospective employer, and that you have a way to send to a verifiable corporate email address to send your credentials. That'll be my one bit of advice. I think it's a great place to source leads through those channels. Yale College and Graduate School of Arts and Sciences students through the Yale CareerLink platform also have access to specific job postings from our employer partners, as well as a connection to CareerShift, which is like an Indeed or a Monster. It is a curated list, or I should say aggregated list of positions around the country in all disciplines that provide yet another source of opportunities. So take advantage of these job boards. Be cautious about sharing information until you've verified that the contact is a valid representative of a company that you're interested in.
Thank you, David. Another question on the chat. for someone who's interested in building a personal website, do you recommend building a personal website for a non-art research focused student and possible career interest? For David or Derek?
Derek, you want to take that one?
Oh, sorry, what was that one?
The question is for some, do you recommend building a personal website for a non-art or research focused student?
It could help. It's a bit dependent upon what the content. I mean, when you're thinking about putting yourself out there with any kind of content management, so a website would be a version of that. You would normally be thinking about what are you trying to capture and put forward. It's most often the case that if you're an artist, a writer, you know, someone who has some version of portfolio or research basis, architecture, engineering, those are the most standard versions. But sometimes it can be branding. You could be involved in communications, you could be involved in marketing, you could have a project basis that was not necessarily artistically oriented, but would still allow you, to create the kind of content that needs to be captured and curated. So as long as you have content that needs curated, that's what a website, and I say website, I mean any platform, right? That's also using social media, it's using your LinkedIn account and those sorts of things. But if you need to actually marshal material and find a way to dig deeper with those things than just the reference points or just the hyperlink to the project, that's where the website would normally come in. So I actually don't think it would necessarily be the line of, you know, is it specifically arts related or research related? I would think it would be like, what kind of content do you have and what kind of story can you tell with that content? I should mention that our office is in the middle of a partnership with Wix.com. Which is allowing for any of our students, undergrad or graduate students, to have a free premium account with the Wix for either 2 or 3 years, depending upon your year. It's a pretty nice reach out that Wix has done with us. So if you are thinking about trying to put together a website, and you don't have a huge background and you'd like something like a Wix, a content management solution that can help you with that, reach out to our office. You can reach out directly to me also, Derek.Webster@yale.edu. Let me know of the request and I can let you know what you need to do in order to put that request in.
Thank you. Questions from the floor? David and Derek and Janine are all here for you. So just anything's available. Any kind of question.
Another question in the chat from Kenny, which I'll take while we're waiting for questions from the floor. Kenny asks, besides the Yale career website, are there other guides or resources that can help you get familiar with how to improve body language, facial expressions? Off the top of my head, I don't know of specific ones, Kenny, but I could tell you if you Google how to prepare for your interview or search terms along those lines, you'll find quite a few of them, and probably including some video demonstrations. Even try YouTube for video demonstrations with 2 people interacting in an interview situation where you can get some prompts for how to position yourself well.
And I would just add one, the Purview Center for Teaching and Learning actually does have some tools to help with diction and voice control. So those can be very useful as well.
One thing I think is difficult, and maybe David, Derek, or Janine could answer this, it relates to the body language, since so much of a successful interview relates to smiling and posture and body language and all the rest of the eye contact. And it also relates to how open people are and how they can express themselves. And often when being interviewed, someone may ask, tell us about a difficult situation you had and how did you deal with it, or you had a challenge. It's very hard unless you have the body language with the hand gestures and the face to really be expressive. And how does one best do that given video chatting? To be authentic and be real, especially on a challenging kind of question.
Sure, I think as we've said before, and others may have suggestions, I think, the bottom line is you have to be yourself. You have to be yourself, and that more than anything will, I think, convey authenticity. You have to get comfortable with the tools and rely on, facial expression and eye contact for the most part to convey emotion and feeling and make a connection with the listener.
Okay, thank you.
And that sort of a question is usually tracking towards sort of a behavioral style interview, which is, in many cases trying to get you a little bit off base, you know, a little uneven or like backtracking. The best way to be preparing for that, even if you feel you're not necessarily in a situation where you feel like, you know, willingness to naturally open, oftentimes just the prep for behavioral is probably the best prep for any interview, because it requires you to know your story really well. And the more work that you put into having the kinds of answers you need for, like, you know, the 3 times something blew up in your face, like during a job, like those kinds of questions are the kinds of things that are going to really require you to really hard and fast know who you are, what you've done, what you've accomplished. So oftentimes the fall back on that consistency and that sense of, you know, without having to hesitate, you have great examples for any of those kinds of, you know, disbalancing kind of questions, is the prep for behavioral, but it's also what's going to make you feel much more, if not open, confident and in control of the narrative that you're putting forward, which in many cases can be just as helpful as you know, being open, quote unquote.
Thank you, Derek and David. We have a question from Jamil. Did I pronounce your name properly? Jamil, you can unmute yourself. You had your hand raised. I don't know where Jamil.
Hello, yes.
Hi, Jamil. Okay, you're on. Okay, can you speak up a little louder?
Yeah, so I had a question for like research. So if you like apply to fellowships or grants for this upcoming summer, and obviously, you know, it got canceled, would there be, if you got accepted to for the fellowship or grant, like, is there a way that you can extend it to the next summer, or would you have to like start all over the application and apply like again for the same opportunity for research?
Sure. So Jamil, I can take that for you. So if you applied through Yale's Office of Fellowships, if you're an undergraduate and applied through Yale's Office of Fellowships, they're actually going to be communicating with everybody who put in an application to fellowships to talk with you about an opportunity to modify that application as needed. So you'll be able to ask them directly depending on what your experience is. I will tell you that for the Domestic Summer Award, which also does fund research opportunities, we have had some students be able to convert those to remote experiences. Even true lab experience, they've been able to convert to somewhat of a remote. And that's going to be up to you if that's the type of experience you want, because that will be a different experience than truly doing research in a lab. But certainly talk to one of our career advisors, talk to the advisors in fellowships to figure out what the best route is.
Okay, yeah, I think I remember they mentioned it, something about remote research, but I think for my certain experience, like, it'd be almost impossible to do it remotely. So
and that's understandable. The remote experiences will probably move more to data analysis and those types of things, but certainly students who are interested in health professions field or pre-med students may want to preserve, as you said, your award or your fellowship for the following year so you can get that true lab experience.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Derek or David, do you want to take the last chat question and I'll follow up with a final question that someone sent to me? There's a question in chat. What platform would you recommend to find remote internships?
Okay, so Janine actually put the link in there that I was going to mention. Right beneath that, you'll see OCS compiled a list it's a narrative for the summer plans COVID-19. That has a really great breakdown of a lot of different resources that go in multiple directions, including the idea of where to start with looking for remote engagement.
Lisa, there was one other question I'd love to just take for a minute that I think is scrolled up. A student who had a question about how to talk to an employer about work authorization. If you are not a student with work authorization in the United States. So first, I would encourage you to reach out to one of our career advisors because we can talk more specifically about your situation and what type of visa you are on. The Office of International Students and Scholars at Yale they're rock stars. They're amazing. So I'm sure you're already in touch with them. But in general, I think it's very important to realize that you want to be honest with an employer. You do not have to offer that information until they ask that information, and they can ask, are you authorized to work in the United States without additional support from the employer? If you have a period of OPT, your answer is yes, that you do have a period of OPT during the summer and after graduation to work before you would need any kind of H-1B sponsorship. So again, it's very specific depending on your particular visa. But there's lots of resources to help. So you can start with OISS and then certainly talk to one of our advisors.
Okay.
Santosh, George, I'd love to answer this. I know we're running out of time, but this is an important one. And I think it might even be building from something I had mentioned about having sort of notes in the background and that sort of thing. And this was my caveat, like it need not.
Derek, can you repeat his question?
Oh yeah, sorry. So the question was, is it okay or preferred to sort of read off a script when you're, and when they ask you, like, to tell them about yourselves? And I would say absolutely not. And the suggestion of having the materials there as a fallback, as a point of resource, that's one of the advantages that I do feel that you gain with the virtual environment. But please do not allow that to stray you in the direction of feeling that you shouldn't be internalizing, organizing, making this a part of like a living, breathing conversation. If you can't do that in the interview, it's going to come across incredibly manufactured, and that's not what they're looking for. There are other places where they'll be looking for you able to write a good cover letter, right? And that's kind of what you would be doing. It would almost be like reading your cover letter. But if you read line for line and you don't bring any of the resonance and story and narrative from the text into a real conversation, it's not going to do well for you. So I would strongly suggest not going in that direction.
I would just add to that the same is true when you're preparing for the most likely questions you'll be asked in an interview. To gather your thoughts and to practice, you might jot down some notes to yourself, but please do not memorize those answers. Be comfortable enough with the key bullet points that you'll be able to convey them in conversational language at the time of the interview.
That's great. Well, thank you. A question I've received is, how can Yale alumni help us now? And there are two highlights for you guys. We have an alum named Tara Falcone, class of 11. You guys may know her. She does a lot of work on financial literacy. She offered now a month ago. She is connecting students, Yale students of all levels, with remote short-term project-based work with alumni, which includes writing, editing, research, data collection, graphic design, video editing, web development, and more. So if you are interested in any terms of short-term project work right now, her email is Tara, T-A-R-A, .Falcone, F-A-L-C-O-N-E @aya.yale.edu. She's a volunteer offering this service to basically match students up with alumni who have an opportunity to share and for you guys to be paid. The other opportunity I want to share, which was just launched, is Cross Campus, Yale Cross Campus, which is a wonderful new resource been worked on by the Alumni Association, Office of OCS, Yale College, and many other parts of Yale. It connects Yale alumni with students worldwide. It's Cross Campus, CROSSCAMPUS.yale.edu. Go there, sign up, 1stGenYale. We have a group. There are other groups there you can join, but it's really an important tool to connect with alumni for career interests, academic interests, geography, background, shared stories, shared experiences. Please go and sign up. It's students are emailing me about job questions or careers or being first gen and kind of how to overcome challenges and be successful. And there are lots of alumni on it now, but it was just launched within Yale for the student community and the broader alumni community. So please sign up. Someone has a question. Oh, that was just, sorry, that's just a reply. And so I just want to thank David Halek and Derek Webster and Janine Dames. Thank you all for being so incredibly helpful and informative and down to earth. I'm going to give your emails out. Derek is derek.webster@yale.edu. David is David Halek at yale.edu, and Janine Dames at yale.edu. It's their first name, last name, dot in between. But also you can go to career strategy at yale.edu, which is the main email link for questions or appointments or things, general information you would like to know. Go to the main career strategy at yale.edu first. But if you have a follow-up question with any of our speakers on what they've said today, I think they'd love to hear from you. And as Janine had said, you guys are open, not 24 hours, but you're open round the clock almost, helping our students. So I want to thank you for doing that. If you have questions for 1stGen Yale, email 1stgenyale@yale.edu for anything we can help you with. And I just want to thank you all for being on our webinar today. We're working on our third webinar, which we hope to announce shortly, which will probably be another 2 weeks. So thank you for coming. I want to give a round of applause.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it.
For you guys. And